It's funny, I host a photography podcast, and up until this last week, I don't actually listen to any photography podcasts. And it's been kind of good to go back and revisit my roots a little bit. Of all places, I've rediscovered Raw Talk, Jared Poland's Raw Talk. And it made me realize that it's not just about the photography. Sometimes it's about the personality as well. Sometimes it's about just the company in the car, or just the background, the familiar, comforting background sounds. Another one that I've been listening to today is Matti Haapoja, his podcast. There's a few things that I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about today shooting event shooting, because I've been doing a few recently, and maybe they're not the sort of jobs that really sort of light you up creatively. They're not the sort of jobs that you aspire to do, but they pay pretty well. And I have some thoughts that I want to share that I think could perhaps make it a little bit easier on most people interested in doing that or interested in getting into that. And I just want to sort of talk it through and speak it out loud and get it off my chest. So let's get right into it. So the first thing I'll say is I listened today to the Hayden Pedersen interview on Matti Haapoja's, I hope I'm saying that name right. Please correct me in the comments. Podcast. I didn't even realize he had a podcast. A few things. I've noticed that most big YouTubers will make a second channel just for the podcast, which makes sense because I've mentioned before, I think these videos might be hurting the main videos on the channel. I think they might sort of reflect poorly on my channel in terms of click-through rates and just general, views and the messages that YouTube is getting from how people interact with my content. And I totally get it. I understand it's not the sort of content that drives big clicks. It's not the sort of content that shows up in search really. It's for a very small engaged audience. I totally understand why people do that. Having said that, it's also kind of hard. It's hard to watch guys like that, knowing that on their main channels they get big views, and then seeing, on their podcast channels they might only have 5,000 or 6,000, channels that have over 1 million subscribers. Having said that, if I was looking at those numbers and they were numbers that I was seeing on a podcast on Spotify or something, and they had 6,000 people subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or Apple or whatever, those numbers would probably be pretty good. I'd be pretty happy with that. 5,000 or 6,000 downloads on Apple Podcasts. I'd be very, very happy with that. But it's just funny how on YouTube it just feels a little bit different. And there's something to be said about not seeing the numbers as well. Something interesting. Anyway, I was listening to Hayden Pedersen on Matti Haapoja's podcast, and they were having a really interesting conversation about vlogging on YouTube. I'm not sure how many people listening to this now have been around on YouTube since the days of Casey Neistat and since the real peak of the daily vlogger, the real golden era of vlogging and sort of the community around that. And there was a few really interesting points that they've raised that I've kind of thought about without even realizing, just something that I've sort of felt instinctively. But I found myself nodding along and agreeing to a lot of the things, and I thought it'd be just a nice place to sort of talk through a little bit of that now. So first of all, the way that we're going on YouTube, and as much as YouTube is different to TikTok, the way that you sort of have to be now with your analytics and, just grabbing and holding people's attention and the signals that you want to be sending to YouTube to get your videos, in front of more eyeballs, you basically need to be engaging from start to finish. You need to be keeping people's attention, and the way to do that is to just cut out anything unnecessary, be straight to the point, be clever with your cuts, fast cuts, changing the angle, keeping someone's, brain and eye constantly refreshing to feel like there's something new and novel happening. Obviously, you have to be very clever with your thumbnails and titles. That's the only way to get someone to actually click on your video. But also very important is to get someone to stay on your video. And the guys, Maddie was saying that the problem with that is we've actually taken a lot of the personality out of the videos. When you used to watch vloggers, or, for the people that used to tune in every single morning to watch Casey's new daily vlog for whatever it was, 2 years, 3 years, I can't even remember. You really grow and you fall in love with the person and the personality, and not just that, the characters in their vlogs and the other vloggers and the other YouTubers that appear as characters in this story, you also sort of branch off and you follow them, and you fall in love with their personalities, and the knock-on effect is you see and become familiar with all the characters in their vlogs. And I just wanted to sort of speak that out loud and think that say that I think that that's really sad that sort of YouTube has lost that personal element, it feels like, a little bit. I always try and keep it a little bit, I try and share a little bit of my actual life and my thoughts and feelings, fears, hopes and dreams. I've shared a lot about the birth of Ziggy and what it's been like as a new dad. And that's, I suppose, what I hope the podcast is, because people that are clicking on most of my videos, if they're coming from search, they don't really care about me. They want to they want to learn something, or they want their life to be somehow different or better off after watching a video. And I know, I can't sort of blame someone for that, because if I'm clicking on someone else's video for a purpose, to learn something or whatnot, then I don't want to hear them ramble for 2 minutes. I don't want to watch them make a coffee or, I'm kind of like, get to the point. So I totally get it. And there's something to be said about being really succinct and not having anything in there that doesn't need to be in there. I know I have been in the past a chronic over-explainer, and just as I'm doing right now, I tend to ramble a little bit. I tend to and ah, and I've tried really hard. I've actually worked really hard to cut that out of my videos, shooting and editing, not just in the edit. I've tried hard to really be conscious of that. But in the same vein, I think in doing that, we're all sort of losing a little bit of the personal element, a little bit of the realness in our videos. So it's a double-edged sword. One nice thing is that the guys were saying on the podcast was they believe that it's probably a cyclical thing. So obviously the trend has been moving further away from that, more towards the TikTok sort of sphere, because everything on that is just about keeping users engaged with new, novel, fast, flashy, just bubblegum, popcorn content. And obviously YouTube is a little bit different. The content's a little bit longer. I feel like the audience, for the most part, is a little bit more mature. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And just particularly lately, the way that I've been thinking about the podcast and the future of the podcast and where I want to do it, I think it sort of cemented the reason for why I do the podcast. And it's because the podcast is somewhere that I can actually share. I can share things that wouldn't probably perform on a normal video, that wouldn't actually be worth me adding into a normal video, because in fact that would actually hurt the analytics of a normal video. So this week I've been thinking about it a little bit more, and I think I'm still leaning towards, after 52 weeks, after the full year, I'm going to pivot and change to an audio only podcast. even if it just means I'm putting up one video a week on the channel. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. And, you know, for the people who do actually care, for the people who've been involved and around for a long time, they can continue on the journey there. And for the people who come just for the main videos on the channel, that's totally fine as well. And the channel will become more, you know, relevant and meaningful for them too. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about shooting events. So in the last couple of weeks, I've shot a christening, I've shot a 40th, I've booked a couple of weddings in the next 6 months, and all of those I would class under events. And, you know, they might sound like pretty small team events, but, you know, the christening that I was at it was a Greek christening, and it's probably 120 people at least. And I think if I had to guess, probably the venue and the meals and the entertainment and all that, it probably cost nearly as much as my wedding did. So it was quite a big event. It wasn't just rock up to the church and take some photos on the steps. It's quite a big thing. Same with the 40th. The 40th was at a beautiful, beautifully styled private event space in a nightclub. And, you know, the person whose birthday it was, you know, they run a big events company, so they know how to throw a great party. And it's not like I'm running around doing, Auntie Carol's 40th down at the RSL. These were good events, and, you know, both great clients that I've worked with in the past, and, you know, they're happy to pay a good fee for quality work, and I really appreciate that. But it got me sort of thinking that even these great clients that I have a good relationship and friendship with, there is a certain balance to shooting events. There is a certain like performance that comes along with it. And what I mean by performance is there's only so much you can do as a single person at an event like this. So, for example, if I'm shooting a party, or for example, I shot like the reception, let's call it, of this christening on the weekend. After doing a couple of laps of the room and walking around and trying to get sort of each group, when I'm at a party, for example, I try and make a bit of a mental note of who I've photographed and who I've not photographed. And one thing that I'll actually do is I will approach people out of the blue. A lot of events photographers won't. They'll just sort of shoot ambient, what's the word? Natural, I'm completely blanking, but just natural moments. You know, they won't sort of pose people or coerce people into photos. I'm the opposite. I think the host generally likes it if you sort of work the crowd a little bit. And for that reason, I think that events shooting is probably like 90% personality and 10% actual photography, if I'm being honest. Like, if you can work a room, I think you can be a great events shooter. Not that it's always easy. I think events are really challenging in terms of lighting. On-camera flash is something that I actually find quite difficult. I'm still yet to find a foolproof method. Not that I'm not happy with the results every time, but I wish I could get on-camera flash in a way that I shoot with off-camera flash, which is basically I don't think too much about the gear. I know what I want and I know how to get it, and I can sort of do it on autopilot. Whereas events photography, I have to sort of really think through it and problem solve. Anyway, where was I going with that? So let's say you're at a party or a wedding reception or whatever. You've done a couple of laps of the room, and by this time you've sort of hit every group. You've sort of tried to get around to every person or most people at the party. And once you've done that, you know, you might still have a couple of hours left to go of this event. And barring any sort of activities or, you know, extra exciting events that are happening on the night, it's not, you know, you can't just keep doing laps and shooting photos of the same people. Firstly, you're going to be hassling the guests. And secondly, it's just not, it's not valuable to be shooting the same people again and again. So there's a few things that I've sort of thought of and started to do in the last couple of weeks. Well, not just the last couple of weeks, but I've been really thinking more about them and why I do these things. And I'm going to run through them now. And they're things that I think anyone could do, and they can make your life a lot easier and just make it generally a more fun experience to shoot these events. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I try and think about all the different types of shots that I want to get in an event. So most of the time, you'll arrive at a venue early and get some pictures of the venue before guests arrive. Let's say it's a wedding. You kind of want to shoot all the table settings and the details and the flower arrangements and all that stuff before the room sort of gets ruined, for want of a better word. You want to shoot all the food as it's coming out before people start to take it off the platters. You want to shoot the table settings before people sit down and, mess it up or whatever. And I would sort of loosely class that sort of shot as a detail. You want to get the little pieces, the little vignettes of the day or the room or the venue that don't really feel that much important on their own, but in context of the rest of the day, they do really help to tell the story. So let's call those details. And another thing, obviously you want to get social photos. You want to get groups of people being happy. You want to shoot the bride and groom, let's say, or the birthday person with their friends. Make sure you get all of the family shots first. Let's call those, loosely, let's call those social pics. So social pics, they're probably, that's the main point of shooting an event, right? You want to get, you're shooting people and you're shooting people having a great time. That's the point of it. So that's number two. The third category that I would sort of class, which is probably something that not everyone does, but it's just something that I've thought a little bit about, being someone who's shot a lot of property, a lot of commercial property in my time. And that is, wides, big wide shots, and talk about just telling the story. It's the opposite of close-up details. You want to get some all-encompassing shots that show the scale of the venue, that show the grandeur of the venue. You might want to shoot some shots out the front. The way I've been doing this is to stick it on a tripod and do some kind of long exposures. Not too long that you've got massive light trails and you blur out all the people, but just to show busyness, just to show hustle and bustle. Getting outside the front of the venue and shooting some long exposures of people arriving at sort of like at dusk or, just after dusk sort of time. That can look really cool, especially if there's like signs on the venue that are lit up. Inside the venue, getting wides of the room, all set up and looking beautiful. Again, slightly longer exposures to get people moving around and just make it look generally, warm and busy and inviting. I think that is a really good idea. And yeah, it's just another way, apart from just telling the whole story, it's another way to kill time and look busy and be busy, to be quite honest, because once you've done a couple of laps, once you've shot the details, most of the details you're going to do early. I like to do this in a bit of a lull in the night. It might be at a time where people are eating their meals, let's say, because to be honest, you don't really want to be shooting people when they've got their mouth full or when they've, sitting down and talking and just socializing. They don't really want to be interrupted for photos, and the photos aren't really going to be that good if you're just shooting candids. So yeah, that's a good time to do that. So that's going to take up some time as well. You can easily spend, 20, 25, 30 minutes. That's a good way to kill a little bit of time. And then by the time that you've done that, generally something else will be happening on the night. The entrees might be finished, or the mains might have come out, or, maybe it's time for you to go and have some dinner if it is a wedding. So that's a good way to kill time, break up your night, and just make it so you're not just pacing up and down. Sometimes I catch myself doing that, and my fear is that just by cutting laps and, one thing that I'm also guilty of is just always trying to make sure I'm aware of where the host is, or the client is, because I want to make sure that if there's something that they want, then they can very easily get my attention, make eye contact with me and pull me over for a photo of something, or, just remind me of something like that. So where was I? So we've got the details, we've got the socials, we've got the wides. Another really good way to kill some time and also add some value to the event is I've been bringing my laptop. And if nothing else, this is just a really good idea and a really good way to just go and have a quick break without just being that guy who sits or stands on the side scrolling on their phone, because I think that's a big no-no in these situations. Sorry, my nose is so itchy. So what I'll do is I'll generally, when I arrive to a venue, I'll find a little quiet place that I can stow my gear and, disappear to a couple of times if I need to switch a lens or whatever else. But also somewhere that I can have my laptop, and then once or twice during the night, I'll tend to go back. I'll load in some photos. I might make a couple of quick selections. I'll sort of push it as far as I can. And, it might just be 10 minutes at a time or 15 minutes at a time when I don't have anything sort of on the immediate schedule. And I've ticked all the boxes that I need to tick, that I can just disappear, have a quick break, but also, be adding value. Because the thing is, like we've said before, if you're just doing laps and laps and you're just shooting the same pictures of the same people, you're actually doing a disservice to the event, because you're hassling the guests, and, you don't want to be too, you don't want the host to be too conscious of you. You don't want the host to be worrying about what you're doing, or, worrying about trying to give you something to do. So I actually think it's a good idea to once or twice during the course of the night just disappear, load up some photos. And what I'll tend to do if I have time is, do a few selections, do a few edits. And that way, by the end of the night, by the second or third time that you pop, backstage to your little green room, you can actually do a quick edit. And then before you leave on the night, you can basically just zap a few photos. I'm on Apple for my computer and phone, so I just airdrop some photos to my phone. And then before I leave, I will generally send a few photos over airdrop to the host. And that way, at the end of the night or first thing the next morning, they have something to upload to Instagram or whatever, or send out an email to their guests or clients or whatever to thank them for the night. They get a little bit of value added because you've rushed a few shots out to them quickly, and maybe it even buys you a little bit more time if you need that to get the edits done. So I think that's actually really useful, and I don't feel guilty about it because it's not me actually trying to, stop working. I think it gives you a little break. It gives the host a little bit of a break from you, and, it's just a really good excuse to disappear for a minute and, also be useful. So by the time you've done all that, generally there's probably some more different types of social shots to do. There might be a dance floor happening now, or there might be some like speeches or like cutting the cake or something like that. And by that stage, you've generally got some more stuff to do. You can cut a few more laps. And the way I shoot weddings and have shot weddings in the past is once everyone, once all the speeches and all that sort of stuff is out of the way, once all the formal events of the night are done, it's just dancing. And, that's basically the same thing all night. You can go back and forth a few times to the dance floor, but generally everyone is getting more drunk and more happy, and the photos are probably getting worse as well. So I tend to say to my couples, once everyone's dancing, I only need to be there for another half hour or an hour or whatever. I don't need to stay all night. Save yourself a little bit of money, and, save me some time that I can get home a little bit earlier. I think that's it. Bring your laptop, bring a tripod to do a few long exposures, and don't be afraid to disappear a couple of times. Take a little bit of a break and add a little bit of value to your session. That's about it for this week. I have actually really enjoyed the last couple of weeks, my freelance jobs. Events, like I said, they're not something that you get into photography to do. They're not something that always sort of lights you up. But, a few hours here and there, they pay quite well. if I can earn in an afternoon, in a few hours on an afternoon, what I would earn for a few days or a couple of days at my normal job, then it's just a bit of a no-brainer. And yeah, it's also good because if you do a great job, like I said, it's like 90% personality. If you do work the room, generally it's not uncommon for one or two other events to come. You're basically putting yourself on display. You're your own best billboard in these situations. And like, for example, I said I shot a Greek christening on Sunday. I think that's probably the 6th or 7th event that I've shot that has come from the first, Greek event that I've shot a couple of years ago. So yeah, put your big smile on, tuck in your shirt, polish your shoes, and get to work. It's a little bit of a boring one this week, but something that I've picked up since the last episode is actually just a bunch of Thunderbolt cables. I kind of watch these. I tend to look them up sort of every couple of months, and I'm a bit of a psycho about cable management and just optimizing my desk and my setup and my workflow. And up until, I'm going to say, the last couple of weeks, Thunderbolt 4 cables have been really expensive. To buy a Thunderbolt 4 cable from Apple, it's like $200 or $300. And this is the first time that on Amazon I've seen Thunderbolt 4 cables, affordable for like $20 or $30. Where was I going with that? Yeah, so I think there's something has happened where the Thunderbolt 4 protocol, I believe, has been opened up to third-party manufacturers, because as far as I know, to get the Thunderbolt, logo, to get the Thunderbolt certification, it needs to be verified by Intel or verified by Apple or something like that. Anyway, just something I thought I'd bring up. Thunderbolt 4 is something like 40 gigabytes per second, gigabits per second or whatever. It's backwards compatible with all USB-C devices. It's fast charging. You can basically run a whole battle station off one of these cables and charge your computer at the same time. So I like to have a bunch of different cables in different lengths, and that way, whatever I do with my setup, it's not going to be cluttered with, cables coiled and looped around or hanging off the desk or just a mess. So a couple of good quality cables. Like I said, I've been picking them up for $20 to $30 in varying lengths, and I think it's really useful for you to have a few too. So that's my tool of the week this week. All right, thank you so much for watching again. We are fast approaching the full year of the podcast. And yeah, I say this every week, but the podcast doesn't do big numbers, but I really appreciate the people that do listen every week. And it's a really funny one because there are a handful of people that will talk to me about things on the podcast almost on a weekly basis. And, even if it's just in conversation, and it's obvious that you guys are watching or listening, but, maybe you don't say to me because you're embarrassed or whatever, but then you talk about things that happen on the podcast. I just want to say you're welcome. Like, I'm glad you're here. Leave me a little thumbs up on the video or drop a little comment down below. I would love this to be a two-way conversation and not just me talking into this microphone and into this camera all week, every week. And that's it. Thanks again for watching. Comment down below something thoughtful. Leave a like on this video if you want to support the channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.